All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. As part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD1111 Database-Driven Web Development course, I've been doing a series of video presentations that are based on the PDF files from Mr. Flavio Copes and his Valley of Code. All right. He puts a bunch of handbooks out here, and so far I've done 5 lectures from the HTML handbook. I think I've done 7 lectures from the CSS handbook, and I'll do 3 or 4 more. Then we'll go into the JavaScript handbook, and I don't know how many I'll do there. These are all client-side JavaScript, so this is meant to be review. Then we'll jump into the new stuff, which is the server-side JavaScript. We'll spend quite a bit of time with this Node.js handbook. Copes used to have a thing on Express. I may still have a copy of his old handbook, so we may or may not look at that, and then we'll jump into React. All right, so this is what we have been doing. Now, before we go back into our PDF, again, I talked about CS Grid and going out to the Wes Bose CSSGrid.io and wanting you to go through this particular lesson, and it says it takes about 4 hours. Well, then we'll go through 20 videos here under flexbox.io, and this is Wes Bose's Flexbox. You are not going to become an expert by just going through these, but it'll get you started, it'll get you on the road and explain to you some of the intricacies of using this stuff. All right, so let's jump in here, and it says Flexbox, also called Flexible Box Module. I've never heard it called that. I've heard it called Flexbox. I've heard it called CSS Flexbox. I've heard it called Flex. As it says, it's one of the 2 modern layouts. We just finished Grid. The next 10 to 12, 10 to 15 pages are on Flexbox here. As it says there, Grid is bidimensional. It allows you to work 2-dimensionally. In other words, you can work on rows and columns at the same time. On the other hand, Flexbox is 1D, or a 1-dimensional layout module, where you can only work on a row at a time or a column at a time, but not them together. That's why oftentimes you see the 2 combined together. All right. The main goal of Flexbox, as the author says here, is to allow items to fill the whole space offered by their container, depending on the rules that you have set. All right, it says unless you need to use old browsers, this will, again, like we talked about with CSS Grid, it'll replace table layouts, floats, clearfix hacks, etc. All right. It says there at the time of this writing, so you'll notice this is now about 4 years ago. It says that it was supported by almost 98% of browsers. But again, if we want to do so, we can again go back, and somewhere in here, I don't know where I put it. I think I left it. There it is. We can put in here instead of, so kind of take a picture of this, so to speak. I could take a picture myself, but you look at that, and then we change this from CSS Grid to Flexbox and hit enter. And you'll notice that there's even more support for Flexbox than there was for CSS Grid. So there's Flexbox and there's Grid. Okay. All right. It says, while we must wait a few years for Grid to catch up, Flexbox is an older technology that can be used right now. Well, really, you can use any of them almost all the time. You add a Flexbox layout with Display Flex or Display Inline Flex. Now, I'm not going to sit there and read every one of these properties to you. It would make no sense to do that, but there are quite a few. All right. The direction, as it says, is what do you want to have happen? Well, by default, we typically want things to go from left to right. That's how we read things, as it says. But you can do a reverse if you want. All right, and you can do it based on a row, or you can do it based on columns. So when you do it rows, as it says, it's going to go left to right. When you do a column, it's going to place the items in a column, ordering from top to bottom. And again, you can reverse both of them. As far as horizontal and vertical alignment, as mentioned right here, by default, items start from the left if the flex direction is row, and from the top if the flex direction is column. You can change the behavior if you need to by using justify content. And here are the different possible values for this. Again, read them yourselves. You can change the vertical alignment, and you'll notice with align items, notice here flex start, end, center, space between, space around. Start, end, center. Okay? But this is the space between because this is the area that you want horizontally. This, the baseline and the stretch, is the area you want vertically. It says baseline looks similar to flex start. All right? It says check out this code pen for a more useful example, which I forked from a pen somebody else wrote. So we can go out here, and you can start looking at how different things are set up. All right. Now, it looks as though in this section that Mr. Copes is not going to have a boatload of examples, which is totally fine, because you can go out just like we talked about before. Here with CSS Grid, my guess is if I just go in here where it says CSS Grid, I'm going to change CSS_grid, and I'm going to change that to Flexbox and hit enter. It says we can't find it. All right, well, you will, I'll tell you that. So let's search for Flexbox. All right, well, we'll do it this way. W3 Schools Flexbox. There it is. I guess it was CSS Flexbox. All right, so you start to see some of the stuff you can do with this. And you'll notice how when we're doing this, how all of the widths of each one of these columns, okay, they're shrinking accordingly. When you get to a certain point where they can't fit anymore, all right, you see what happens. And they go through many examples that are in here. I would suggest going through this first, then going through the West Bows. But, I know with a lot of you, well, I don't have time to do all that. Do what you can do. All right. By default, items in a Flexbox container are kept on the same line. To force them across multiple lines, you use wrap. And I don't believe in the example that we just looked at in W3 Schools, they had wrap. A shorthand property called FlexFlow lets you specify the direction and wrap in one line. I think that when you're first learning this, it's like when I first started learning about using borders, or when I first started learning to use font properties. I like to stack each one on multiple lines. Property on one line, another property, another line, another one, another line, so I could see exactly what was happening. Plus, by doing it that way, I could take a line or lines and comment them out. All right. So since now we've been seeing the properties you apply to the container. Single items can have a certain amount of independence and flexibility by using the order align cell, flex, grow, flex, shrink, flex basis, and flex. All right. Items are ordered based on an order they are assigned. By default, every item has order 0, and the appearance of the HTML determines the final order. You can override this by using order on each item. So as it says, you can make an item appear before all others by giving it a negative value. An item can choose to override the container align items. So you can make, again, when you saw just a minute ago, when we looked at, not that one, that one, you can see what's been done here. All right. Grow, shrink, notice as it says here, the default for any item is 0. If all items are defined as 1 and 1 is defined as 2, the bigger element will take up twice the amount of space. All right. With shrink, again, the default is 1. If all items are defined as 1 and 1 is 3, the bigger element will shrink 3 times faster than the other ones. When less space is available, it will take 3 times less. So that's flex shrink as opposed to flex grow. With flex basis, as it says there, if you set it to 0, it sizes the item according to its width and height and adds extra space as necessary. All right. There is a flex property that, as mentioned here, you can use and have it combine the stuff. You can combine flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis together using a shorthand. If you think that's easier to understand, then use it. All right. Now, as mentioned in the past, tables were not just used, they were overused. In fact, I have known web developers, and this was years ago, that what they did when they set up, they basically had a template for all their websites. And they put the entire website, regardless of the number of pages it was, inside a humongous table. And then for each page, they put each page into a table. All right. That's not really the way tables are used much anymore. Again, tables should be used for table or tabular data only. Today with Grid and Flexbox, as it says, you can make tables just using it for regular tables. So it says, let's start from the HTML. This is a basic table. All right. Let's go and take a look at the one that's in here. So I'm going to grab this table. All right. We will grab it. We will put it into our, what we had in here before. Let's see, in our, okay, we've got this. We'll leave that in there for now. I'll tell you what, we'll do that. And let's go back. What is in our About page right now? That's where we went in and we did the different things with colors. All right, so let's take that and let's comment that out. All right, and let's open that up with Live Server. And you notice there's not much in there right now. That's good. So what we will do is, after this is the About page, let's put in that table. Now, as of right now, there'll be no CSS on it, in it. So it doesn't look like much. Name, age, Flavio, and Roger. Okay, fine. All right. Again, I'm using the example that Copes is using here. All right. We can use CSS to style the elements. Let's start with a border. So I think we already have this from earlier. All right. I think we already have pretty much this. So let me look. Table, head, etc. So let's grab this. And then let's go back to our main CSS file, which is there. And let's see. There was the table header and the table data. So I want to just see how this looks different. Okay, so we've got the table itself. All right, TD and TH. It's basically the same as what we had. So nothing new there. That's why it was already being, that's why it already had the padding and it had the border in it. Okay, all right. If we pair it with some margin, we get a nicer result. Fine. One common thing with tables, as the author says, is the ability to add color to one row and a different color to another row. This is possible using the nth child selector. So let's add that. There's our opposite coloring. Probably now on our home page, didn't we have a table in there as well? I don't remember if we did, or did we have one In our contact page, maybe we have no tables anymore. Okay, that's totally fine. All right, but you can see the coloring that's in there. That gives us this, and you saw the same thing. He's got another one in here. He's got Sid, who's 6. Why don't we put that in there? Okay, there you see that. So ours pretty much now looks like his. If we add the border collapse to the table element, all borders are collapsed into one. Okay. So let's add this. And all that's going to do is make this look a little bit nicer. That's all. Let's put that above here because that's affecting the whole table. So let's come in here and do a table. Like that. And now if we go back and look, all right. The bottom line is you can say whatever you want. It's going to look more professional, whatever you want to say. All right. Centering things in CSS is a task different if you need to center horizontally or vertically. It says in this post, I explain it. If a new solution is provided by Flexbox, I ignore the old techniques because we need to move forward. That makes sense. All right, text is very simple to center horizontally with the text align property. Yeah, we've looked at this. We've done this before. The modern way to center anything that is not text is to use Flexbox. All right. So as it says there, any element inside of my section will now be automatically centered. So let's grab this. We're going to copy this. I'm going to put it into here. We'll put it up here. All right. So that's an ID that's called my section. All right. Then we're going to go back. So let me save that. Let me go back into the About page. And let me put this whole table into a div with an ID that's called my section. I think that's how it was done. So, and then we will do this. Now, to make it just look a little bit nicer, in my opinion, I'm going to go back and I'm going to highlight the entire table here. And I'm going to move it over one tabs dot. All right. So we'll save. Now let's double check. And in styles, it was my section. It's all lowercase. So this should be my section. Whoops. Section like this. Now, did that center the table on the page? And it did. That really didn't take much to do that. All right. Here is an alternative approach if you don't want to use Flexbox. I'm going to leave that off, but we could have done that as well. And we've talked about this before. Margin 0 auto is a shorthand for margin top and bottom of 0 and margin left and right of auto. We've talked about that previously. Traditionally, it's always been a difficult task, all right, to center a table vertically. It says Flexbox now provides a great way to do this. And is this what we had in here before? Display flex and align item center. All right, so instead of the justify content center, we'll leave that in there. And we'll put align items center as well. All right, and we'll bring that up. Okay. And it should be centered on the page. Now I'm going to try something here, and that is I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to take this line and I'm going to comment it out and see if that changes anything. All right, so you can see what happened. So now we've got that. So let's uncomment this and comment out this line right here. All right, doesn't look like it's really been changed a whole boatload. All right, so let's take a look here. Any element inside of my section will now be vertically centered. So to do them both, that's kind of what I just did. All right. And it says you can also do, so you can do this, and this is doing it with Flexbox, and you can do the same thing with Grid. All right. So let's put this, oops, center horizontally and vertically using Flexbox. And the same thing using CSS Grid. So I'm going to grab that code that they had put in there. But because I really don't want to do them both, it makes no sense to actually do them both. All right, I'm going to take this code in here and I'm just going to comment it out like that. All right. Lists, as it says here, are a very important part of many web pages. CSS can style them using several properties. You've already seen this. Now the list style type, there are really three main ones. You get, by default, you get disk, which is the colored in circle, black circle. You could put in circle, which is the circle that's not colored in, so it's just got a black outline, and you could use square. If you don't want to do that, you can use a list style type and you can add a URL and you can put in your own delimiter or whatever you want to call it for your list items. So as it says, list style image can be used for the custom markers, what I just mentioned. All right. Okay, so where am I here? All right. List style position lets you add the marker outside or inside of the list content. All right. And as it says, the list style shorthand allows you to do that. It's not that big a thing. All right. Now, before I go on, the next section that's in here is going to talk about media queries. All right. So we have now talked about Flexbox for about 15 or 20 minutes. And now we've talked about, we talked about Grid for 15 or 20 minutes. Now we've talked about Flexbox for almost 25 minutes. So when we come back, all right, we're going to talk about media queries. That'll be the next section. And we'll talk about those for about 10 or 11 pages. So this is the way I see this flushing out. We've now done this, and then we talked about Grid, and then we talked about Flexbox. So we'll talk about media queries. Then there's a couple more subjects we may or may not combine. So we may have one more lecture here, we may have two more lectures here, or three. It's not that big a thing, one way or the other. But I'll be back to talk to you about media queries in just a couple minutes.